All right, welcome everyone, and welcome back if you have been to one of our webinars before. I'm glad you could join us for today's topic, which focuses on teachers that are looking to make a career change and some strategies they can employ to successfully make that transition to a new field. My name is Keith Spencer, and I'm one of our career experts here at FlexJobs. And as a former teacher myself, I'm excited to be discussing this topic with you all today. While we're giving everyone a minute to get in and get settled, please feel free to share where you're joining us from in the chat section. Before we dive into our main topic today, I'm going to cover a few housekeeping items. You are certainly welcome to take notes during the webinar if that's your preference, but I want to let you know that this webinar is being recorded, and a link to the video as well as some resources discussed during the presentation will be sent out to you within a week or so to the email address you used to register for today's event. Please note that this presentation has been pre-recorded, but the Q&A portion that will follow the presentation is going to be conducted live with one of our career experts. If you have a question that you'd like to ask, please make sure to put it in the Q&A section of Big Marker rather than the chat section. This really helps us keep track of questions in one place, and the Q&A section also allows you to click a thumbs up if somebody else has asked a question that you'd like to hear the answer to, so we can see which questions are most popular. We probably won't be able to answer everyone's question today, but we can almost guarantee that you will learn something helpful. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Here's a quick overview of what we'll be covering today. First, we're going to talk about the usefulness of self-reflection when you're considering making a career change and how self-reflection can help you begin to determine your new direction. Then we're going to discuss transferable skills, what they are, how you can identify your top transferable skills, and the ways that understanding your best transferable skills can help lead to a new profession. Next, we'll go into some strategies that you can and should use to conduct research on your potential career options so that you're fully informed and prepared to launch your career change. We will then talk about the ways that you can compensate for potential skills gaps and develop an action plan to gain important skills, experience, and qualifications that you might currently be lacking. And for the final portion of our main discussion today, we'll focus on different aspects of the job search and interview process and strategies that you can use to maximize your chances of success. Lastly, we will close out the webinar today with our live audience Q&A with one of our career experts. Okay, so let's start things off by discussing the purpose of self-reflection and how it can help you in the early stages of your decision to make a career change. Self-reflection essentially requires you to look inwardly, to examine your thoughts, feelings, experiences, interests, and motivations. And it can be really important in the job search, especially if you're considering making a career change. In terms of job search specific self-reflection, you want to think about the things that motivate you to go to work each day, the things that you like or don't like about a job, the things you really want or value in a job, and the things that you are maybe aiming to avoid. This type of reflection can help you begin to narrow down your focus. To do this type of self-reflection, it can be helpful to ask yourself some questions. For example, what motivates me? This could be a certain salary level, the ability to help others, getting to exercise your creativity, having the opportunity to solve problems and challenges, or any number of other things that are reflective of your values and interests. Another good question is, what am I trying to avoid? This could be feelings of being underappreciated, feeling overworked or burned out, feeling like you're not supported or respected, or even an unhealthy work-life balance. It's also helpful to ask yourself, what type of environment do I want to work in? This could be in person or remote environment, or maybe even a hybrid environment, which is sort of the best of both worlds. It could also be that you want to work in a collaborative role, or maybe as more of an individual contributor, or it could even include the size of the company or organization for which you want to work. Asking yourself questions like these will help you better understand what you want work to look like for yourself in the future, and will help you start to develop ideas about the type of career you may wish to pursue. Self-reflection is also really important at this point in your career transition because not every career will align with your interests, values, skills, experience, and motivations. So you want to have a clear understanding of what those are before trying to dive into a new career path. We'll talk more about identifying your transferable skills and finding careers that could be a good fit for you shortly. But first, I want to bring up another topic that is really important for teachers who are considering leaving the teaching field to keep in mind. So when thinking about leaving the teaching profession, it's also important to remember to give yourself some grace. What I mean by this is trying to show yourself some understanding and self-compassion. Accept that you are making this decision for a reason, and it doesn't mean that there is anything wrong with you or that you're giving up. So try to have patience and practice some self-care when you're making this decision. And the reason I say this is because many of us entered the teaching profession because we felt like it was our calling, like we were meant to be teachers because we value helping others and supporting the learning and development of younger people. This can make it emotionally difficult to leave the teaching field because it can feel like we're maybe turning our backs on our calling, but really that's not true. There are a lot of factors that can make teaching really difficult and lead you to feeling burned out. Keep in mind that teaching is consistently ranked among the top 10 most stressful jobs. So it isn't your fault that this stress might be weighing you down. You want to keep in mind and remind yourself that your own health and well-being should be your main focus. So make sure that you're giving yourself some of that grace if you're considering leaving the teaching profession and maybe struggling with mixed feelings about that decision. Plus, a lot of aspects of what might have made teaching feel like your calling can be found in other jobs. Teaching is not the only profession where you can help others or support learning and development. Maybe you could work in a nonprofit organization, or you could continue teaching but in an online capacity, or you could move into a training and development role for a private company. These are just a couple examples that could allow you to maintain that calling just outside of the traditional classroom setting. To give a personal example, I felt burned out from teaching after about 4 or 5 years in the classroom, but I still had that drive to help people. That's why I started working in career development related roles, because it allows me to teach and train people how to improve their job search efforts and empower them with the skills and knowledge to have a more fulfilling career. So there are definitely ways to continue using your expertise to do things that motivate and fulfill you. So just make sure to give yourself some grace if you're having any negative feelings about leaving the classroom. All right, now let's shift gears a bit here and start talking about transferable skills. Transferable skills, if you aren't familiar with that term, refers to skills, abilities, knowledge, competencies that can be valuable across a wide range of jobs, industries, and environments. That's why they're called transferable. They can literally transfer from one job to another. Transferable skills can also include skills that are technical or non-technical in nature, and they aren't limited to job-specific competency areas. For example, in terms of technical transferable skills, these can include knowing how to use various software programs like the suite of Microsoft Office applications, which are used in a vast range of fields, or remote communication tools, which are used in remote, hybrid, and even in-person environments. For non-technical transferable skills, these can be interpersonal skills, like your ability to communicate effectively with others or build strong relationships, as well as other skills like problem solving, critical thinking, analysis, creativity, organization, and the ability to teach and train others in new concepts. In terms of how your transferable skills can help you transition to a new career, you almost want to think of them as your pathway or bridge to a new field. It's important to note that employers don't expect applicants for job postings to have 100% of what is listed in the job description, which is why it's usually recommended to go by the 60% rule. If you have done or can do at least 60% of what they're looking for, chances are good that you're a solid candidate for that role. So as you begin looking at job descriptions and researching different career options, which we'll talk more about in a little while, Consider the transferable skills that you already possess that will be relevant to this role so you can leverage those skills to help you with your transition. I mentioned earlier that I transitioned from teaching to a career development role, and I leveraged my transferable skills to do this. I essentially emphasized that while I was missing the career-related content at that point, I had all the other skills to be successful in that first career development role. I can communicate effectively, build strong relationships with others, explain complex topics in a way that's easy to understand, and I can quickly and effectively learn new concepts. All of these transferable skills made me a strong candidate, even though I was still missing a few key elements. Now, when it comes to determining your transferable skills, there are two main ways you can go about this. The first approach is one we've already discussed, self-reflection. Think about the experiences you've had, the projects you've worked on, the responsibilities you've held, and the feedback you've received. What skills did you use to do these things? What have others told you you're skilled at? That's a good first step in identifying your transferable skills. The second approach is to utilize different assessment tools. There are different assessments out there that you can take to help you identify not only your work values and your interests, but also your transferable skills. And I want to note that in the resources section of this webinar, you'll see a resource titled the FlexJobs 4-Step System for Career Changers. And it includes links to assessments that can assist you in honing in on your best skills. So it might be helpful to check that out if you're struggling to identify your transferable skills. As mentioned on the last slide, you can think of your transferable skills as your bridge or pathway to a new career. Understanding your top transferable skills can help you determine the direction in which you might want to take your career and help get you there successfully. The key is to understand your audience. So you want to research your target roles and carefully review position descriptions so you can emphasize the relevant transferable skills that you possess to help demonstrate your fit for that future role or future industry. Essentially, think about what you have, analyze what they need, then show them how the dots connect. And there are always going to be elements that you're missing, like when I described my own transition from teaching to career development. But one of the ways that you can overcome certain skills deficits that you might have is to show that you are a quick learner. We all know that this is true of teachers. I imagine a lot of you in this webinar have been presented with a new curriculum or new topics that you needed to teach on fairly short notice, which meant that you had to quickly master the material so you could then teach it to your students. This is definitely a skill that you can leverage to your advantage going forward. Okay, so once you have a sound understanding of your motivations, your interests, your values, and your transferable skills, which will hopefully help you narrow down your focus, it's time to start examining alternative career paths. In terms of finding the right fit for yourself, you may already have some specific options in mind. There might be careers that you've considered before because they sound interesting to you, or maybe options that other people in your life have suggested to you in the past. But there are some other strategies that you can employ to identify other potential fits for your next career. The 4-Steps system that I mentioned earlier in the resources tab has links to different tools that can be helpful to you in identifying your fit, including one called Career One Stop. Career One Stop and a similar resource called ONET both have a wealth of information on a vast array of different careers based on Department of Labor data. With both of these tools, you can look for different types of careers through a keyword search. You could search for careers by looking at different industries, and you can also examine rapidly growing career fields or fields with bright hiring outlook. This can be beneficial because growing fields and fields with a bright outlook mean that people are in high demand, and they can also provide solid job security, which is important to a lot of us. It can be really helpful to leverage different AI tools, especially language models like ChatGPT, to help determine a good career fit. For example, you could give ChatGPT a prompt along the lines of, I've been a teacher for the last 10 years, but I want to find a role outside of the education field. What could be a good fit for me? ChatGPT will then present you with some different options that you can then research further. You could even give ChatGPT a prompt like, based on the following resume, what are some good potential career options for me besides teaching? Then you can hold shift, press enter, skip down a line or two, and then paste your resume into ChatGPT. And then you'll be presented with some more tailored options that fit your specific experience. You can also use the transferable skills that you identified to help you search for careers using different job search boards like FlexJobs. Most job search boards do not limit you to only searching by job title or company name. You can also search by different keywords, including skills. This was actually how I found my first role in the career development field. I was searching using keywords like training, instruction, and assessment. This is incredibly helpful because you might not have a specific job title in mind, but if you know your top transferable skills, you can search by those skills and see where the demand for those skills might be. As you're searching for different careers that could be a good fit for your experience and skills, do keep in mind that 60% rule that we mentioned. You don't need to match 100% of the responsibilities and qualifications listed in a job posting, but you do need a majority of them in order to be considered a solid fit. Now, that being said, do keep in mind that many employers will differentiate job postings by preferred qualifications and required qualifications. If you're only missing one, maybe two of the required qualifications, you could still be a good fit for that role, but the more required qualifications that you're missing, the less likely it is that you'll be invited to interview for that role. With preferred qualifications, there's greater flexibility, so just keep that in mind. So once you have some ideas in mind for a potential career fit that could suit your interests, skills, motivations, and values, you want to make sure that you're researching them thoroughly so you know what these careers might entail, what types of companies hire for these roles, what the hiring outlook looks like, and the type of work environment for these roles. That way you can verify that they really are a good fit for you. As with determining your fit, searching job boards and reviewing descriptions is a good research method that can give you a better understanding of the types of responsibilities that your target careers might include, as well as the typical qualifications and skills needed to do those roles successfully. Career One Stop and ONET will also show you information like typical education requirements and other necessary qualifications, making them a really helpful research tool as well. Again, you can leverage different AI tools in conducting additional research on careers of interest. You could give ChatGPT prompts like, what can you tell me about careers in corporate training? Or what skills and qualifications are needed to be a copywriter? And then you'll then be presented with useful information that can help you initiate your research. Another good method to help you learn more about your potential target industry or career is to tap into your network to conduct informational interviews. Think about the people you might already know or search through your connections on LinkedIn to see if you can find someone in your network that is already doing the type of role that interests you, or maybe even working for a company to which you might want to apply. Then you can try asking that person if they would be willing to speak with you and answer some questions so you can learn about their experience in that field. You can ask them about their career path to help understand what the progression in that field might look like. You can ask what they enjoy or what they don't like about that field, or even ask about tips they might give to someone who's trying to begin a career in that field. It's always helpful to get some firsthand perspective, especially if it's coming from someone that you already know and trust. But whichever strategy or strategies you end up employing, it's really important to make sure that you're fully informed about your specific field of interest before trying to launch a career into that new industry. That way you can avoid potential pitfalls and help maximize your chances of success when making that transition. When you're attempting to make a change into a new career field, often you will experience gaps in skills or knowledge, like with my example of lacking career development related knowledge. This is to be expected, but let's talk about some of the ways that you can close potential skills gaps that you might encounter. As you do your research, keep an eye out for areas in which you might be lacking. These could be specific skills, levels of experience, or certifications, degrees, or other qualifications where you might have a gap that you need to overcome. Having a skills gap can disrupt your smooth transition to a new field, but there are definitely ways to overcome these roadblocks. You just need to create an action plan to overcome that gap. When developing your action plan, you also want to keep in mind a timeline that will be reasonable and manageable for you. For instance, if you're trying to enter into a new field that commonly requires a specific type of post-secondary or postgraduate degree, graduate degree that you don't have yet, this is likely going to take quite a bit of time and money to bridge this gap. It's typically easier to bridge gaps if you already have most of the typical required qualifications. This isn't to dissuade you from completely overhauling your career if that's your choice, but it is important to be mindful of how much time, effort, and possibly financial resources you may need to commit. Some options that you can consider to help bridge some of these potential skills gaps include courses or trainings. There are a lot of online courses and trainings available that you could pursue to help bolster your credentials, and there are far-ranging options in terms of both time and cost, including a lot of free resources that are out there. Certification programs can also be a good option, and there are a wide range of certifications that you could pursue to help launch your new career path. For example, some areas where a certification can really boost your career potential include IT fields, finance and accounting, various healthcare roles, project management, human resources, data analysis, and even marketing and digital marketing. And lastly, volunteering is a great option to consider as well. If you're aiming to build up your level of experience in a new career field, you could look for opportunities to test and hone new skills in a professional capacity through a nonprofit organization, maybe by proposing a new project or offering your services for free to help them with an area in which they have need. Even if experience is gained in a volunteer capacity, it's still worthwhile experience that you can add to your resume in order to showcase relevant skills and accomplishments to future employers. So definitely consider that option. Once you've chosen your new target career, identified potential skills gaps, and have created an action plan to bridge those gaps, it's then time to start searching and applying for jobs in your new field of interest. So let's talk about some things to keep in mind about the job search and interview process. When you're searching for jobs, it's a good idea to employ multiple strategies rather than relying on one single approach and just hoping for the best. The first strategy, which is the most common strategy for job seekers, is to use job search boards. Job search boards are useful because they house thousands of job postings, but this can also be overwhelming if you aren't specific in your search parameters. Most job search websites will allow you to use a variety of filters for your search, and I highly recommend using those filters. You can also find specialized job search boards that focus on particular industries or environments. I'm sure many of you in this webinar use teacher-specific job boards to find roles in the classroom, and FlexJobs is an example of a job board with a primarily remote focus. So consider doing a search for specialized jobs related to your target field or your target work environment. You can also employ what is known as the reverse job search. Essentially, with this strategy, you are identifying specific companies or organizations that you might be interested in working for one reason or another, and then keeping an eye on their hiring page to find roles that pop up that could align with your new path of interest or your transferable skills. If you take this approach, it can also be really helpful to follow and engage with these companies on social media, especially LinkedIn, and to search their employees on LinkedIn to see if there's anyone who might be a first or second degree connection of yours, so you could attempt to network with them directly. I know a lot of teachers don't use LinkedIn, but if you're thinking of leaving the teaching field, you really should create an engaging profile that shows your experience, your skills, and the value that you bring to the table, and then work to grow your connections on there, because it's one of the easiest ways to network with others. Which actually brings us to our next two strategies, which we touched on when talking about researching new fields: networking and informational interviews. The best strategy for networking, in my opinion, is to approach it as an opportunity to gather information and learn from others, while also supporting others and sharing your own expertise that could be valuable to them, not just using it as a way to obtain favors from people. Try to find people in your network that work for companies that you're interested in, or have established the type of career you're hoping to establish. Then see if they'd be willing to speak with you so you can learn more about the field and how they got to where they are. You want to try to let them do most of the talking, but as the conversation progresses, start sharing more details about your interests, your skills, and the value you can bring to the table, since this might spark other ideas in them about how they could help you without you needing to directly ask for their assistance. Best case scenario with networking is that they might be able to direct job leads your way, or introduce you to others in their network that could bring a job lead to your attention. Worst case scenario with networking is they just don't respond to your outreach, or they say they don't have time to speak with you. And the middle of the road scenario is that you learn some helpful information and advice that could be beneficial to you in the future. So definitely a strategy worth employing. Another important thing to work on as you're preparing for applying to jobs is updating your application materials, primarily your resume and your cover letter. Keep in mind that your resume, up to this point, is more than likely geared towards your teaching career. While much of your teaching experience, the skills you've honed as a teacher, and the accomplishments you've achieved will be relevant in some way to your future career field, there are other aspects of your experience that will not be quite so applicable. Again, this means that you need to pay careful attention to job descriptions. When applying for jobs, you want to think about your audience. What will be relevant and impactful to them? Thankfully, the position description is essentially your cheat sheet for doing this, because they are giving you the answers to the test by describing what they seek in potential candidates for this role. So do your best to emphasize your relevant transferable skills in your resume and your cover letter. And then also, when trying to make unrelated tasks or responsibilities relevant to a different audience, it's really helpful to go beyond just listing out the things you did. What I mean by this is showing the reader the method you used to accomplish the things you did, the purpose or greater impact behind the things that you did, and the positive results, especially if they are quantifiable, that you achieved. Anyone can list tasks, but that isn't impactful to the reader. Method, purpose, and results are impactful. Essentially, you want to show rather than just tell. Don't just list that you're a great communicator on your resume. Paint the picture of how you've communicated effectively, what the purpose behind your communication has been, and what results you achieved through your exceptional communication skills. Then lastly, and arguably most importantly, you need to tailor your resume and your cover letter for each position to which you apply. This goes beyond what we already talked about in terms of tailoring your resume and cover letter for your new field of interest, and actually means tailoring them specifically to each unique job. This is important for two main reasons. First, recruiters and hiring managers initially only take a few seconds to scan your resume. So if you aren't catching their attention with relevant information quickly, you could easily find your way to the no pile in short order. The second reason, many organizations use applicant tracking systems, which allow employers to run a keyword screen on your resume. Essentially, they rank the importance of certain keywords and phrases in the job description, and then the ATS is searching for those keywords and phrases and scoring and ranking you among applicants based on that screen or that search. This means that you want to pay careful attention to the job description and identify keywords and phrases, specific skills and abilities, types of accomplishments, and other applicable experiences or qualifications that are going to matter to this audience. Then make sure you're highlighting aspects of you and your work history that align well with what you've read. Unfortunately, this does also mean that you will want to modify and rewrite at least portions of your resume and cover letter with each application, but you want to view this as taking a quality over quantity approach. One strategy that I personally use is to have a master resume that is 5 to 6 pages long with 20 to 30 bullet points for each previous job that I've had. When I find a job that I want to apply to, I'll make a copy of that master resume and retitle it, Keith Spencer resume for company name, and then start removing bullet points that aren't as relevant until I can get it down to 2 pages. I also like to start my resume with a professional summary and key skills section, which you will see in the resume samples that are located in the resources section of this webinar. And then I'll heavily tailor that summary and key skills section to that individual job, focusing on my most relevant skills and accomplishments and incorporating keywords from the job posting. That can be a great way to help you tailor effectively while saving you some valuable time. And then finally, interview preparation is another essential part of the job search that you need to think about. Anytime you have an interview coming up, it's important to prepare thoroughly. This is even more true when you're attempting to make a career change, because certain questions or topics might come up that aren't easily answered if you haven't worked in this type of role or field before. So when you're preparing for an interview, you want to maintain that mindset of thinking about your audience. Every answer, every story you tell, question you ask, etc., should be relevant and relatable to your audience, their needs, and the role they are attempting to fill. It can be really helpful to keep this in mind when you're reviewing common interview questions and thinking about your potential responses. That way, when the interview comes around, you'll already be prepared to speak to their specific needs and wants. Also, a tip that I really like in terms of considering common interview questions is to use ChatGPT. You can ask ChatGPT this question: based on the following job description, what are some questions I should be prepared to answer in an interview? Then hold shift, press enter, skip down a line or two, and then paste in the job description. You could even ask ChatGPT to provide some sample responses to get your mind thinking in the right direction. There's no guarantee you'll be asked these exact questions, and you don't want your answers to sound scripted, but again, this will at least help you get your mind thinking in the right direction. Since you won't know for certain what questions you might be asked in an interview, it can also be a great idea to develop some stories, examples, and talking points from your past that can be used to demonstrate the relevance of your experience and transferable skills. I personally like to go line by line through job descriptions and write down examples of how I have done those exact things or very similar things in my previous roles, so I'm ready to speak about my applicable skills, experiences, and accomplishments during the interview. And when changing careers, there's a good chance you will be asked about things that you've never done before. This is another area where your preparation is important. Pay attention to the job description and identify those things you haven't done before. Then think about what you would do in those situations. It's perfectly acceptable to be honest and admit you haven't done something before, but then give an overview of how you would handle that situation so that they can understand your thought process. It's also really important to develop some insightful questions to ask the employer, since the vast majority of interviews will end with, "Do you have any questions for us?" You want to be careful not to ask things that you could have uncovered during your own research, or focus solely on things like salary, benefits, time off, or things like that. Try to ask questions that can give a better understanding of the scope and expectations for the role, the needs of the organization, the company culture, and other things that will be important to the person hired for this position. This will help show your genuine interest, passion, and commitment to excel in this role if you're hired. There is a resource included in the resources tab that has some great sample questions you can ask in an interview, so be sure to check that out. And then lastly, it's always a good idea to follow up your interviews with a thank you email sent separately to each person with whom you interviewed. Keep your thank you note short and to the point. Mention that you really appreciate their time, enjoyed learning more about the role and the company, and that you're looking forward to hearing back from them. Thank you emails are a good way to leave a lasting positive impression and demonstrate that you are a kind and thoughtful person. Okay, so now some final reminders and action steps as you move forward with your potential career change. The first one there, use that self-reflection to help understand your interests, motivations, and values. Next, identify and analyze your top transferable skills. You want to research potential alternatives based on your skills and your self-reflection. You want to create an action plan to close any potential skills gaps that you may have. You want to use your target roles to guide your job search efforts, and then update your materials and prepare thoroughly for interviews. Okay, so we're now going to move into the Q&A portion of our webinar. As a reminder, a copy of the recording as well as resources presented will be emailed within the next week or so. Be sure to check your spam folder just in case they get filtered there. For even more tips, tricks, and resources, I recommend going to the FlexJobs blog. You'll see the URL on the slide there. It includes a vast amount of free articles, resources, webinars, and videos for members and non-members alike. Now let's finally go ahead and open up to your questions. All right, everyone, we're going to move into our Q&A portion now. Before we get started, could someone let me know in the chat section if you can hear me okay? Can you hear me? Oh, there we go. All right. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. So my name is Keith Spencer. I am the voice that you heard on the recording there, and I will be answering your questions today. So let's go ahead and dive in. Our first question here is about applicant tracking systems. This person says they have been applying for jobs for about 6 weeks or so, not really hearing much back. They've heard about applicant tracking systems, or ATS, automatically ruling out resumes. They've changed their resume and cover letter to be specific to each role. Can you write a resume that might be more successful getting around these systems? Yeah, so as was mentioned, I think after you asked this question, the webinar did touch on applicant tracking systems a little bit there, but just to give you a real quick recap, essentially they are software programs that employers are able to, insert specific qualifications, different keywords, software program skills, things like that into the software program. And often they can also rank them in importance to them. So, if they rank something really highly, that might mean that the ATS is looking to find that, multiple times on your resume, just as an example. Now, the ATS doesn't specifically rule people out of the hiring process, but it's going to rank you compared to other candidates. So if you're not paying attention to keywords and phrases that stand out as being really important in that job description, then chances are you're going to get ranked pretty lowly, and they might ignore your application, or quickly put you on the no pile, especially if they have a lot of other people that are ranked pretty highly, or at least enough that they are interested in moving forward. So you do want to pay attention to that. So my best advice here, it can be tricky with applicant tracking systems, right? Because you're kind of guessing at what these keywords and phrases might be in these job descriptions. So pay careful attention to the job descriptions, read it multiple times. I'm the type of person, I like a hard copy of things in front of me. So I'll print it out, I'll read it multiple times. And as I'm going through it, I will highlight words and phrases that stand out as being important. One of the easiest ways to do that is if they mention something multiple times in the job description. Like if they say you need to be, just as an example, like a great communicator, 2 or 3 times in that job description, well, you better believe that I'm going to use communication in multiple places in my resume to try to, accommodate what the ATS might be looking for. So you do really want to pay careful attention to that. It is a little bit of a guessing game, like I mentioned. Now, one of the things that I do recommend, and it was touched on a little bit there at the end of the webinar, you can have a professional summary and key skills section at the top of your resume. So if you take the approach that I mentioned in the webinar of having like a different master resume, or excuse me, having a master resume and then making a copy of it and kind of whittling it down until it's 2 pages and specifically geared towards, that individual position, you then want to focus on your professional summary and key skills section to do even more tailoring. So I honestly will do a brand new summary and key skill section for every application because I will focus the bulk of my tailoring efforts on those two pieces there. So really trying to incorporate, specific accomplishments that resonate with this job or this employer, focusing on key skills, incorporating those keywords and phrases. That's your best bet. That's going to save you a lot of time rather than having to rewrite your entire resume each time. Now, that being said, when I say focus the bulk of your tailoring efforts on those two sections, you do also want to re-examine your bullet points as well, because you'll want to try to, mirror their same language. So quick example, sometimes a Microsoft Excel, sheet can be called a spreadsheet or it can be called a database. So, pay attention to what language they are using and make sure that you are mirroring their language so that you are hopefully, speaking to that ATS. So again, focus the bulk of your tailoring efforts on that summary and key skills section because the ATS will pick up on it. And then also it's the first two sections that the recruiter or hiring manager is going to read. So you'll capture their attention quickly. And then also take a, reassessment of your bullet points to see if there's anything that you could be wording a little bit differently, just to make sure that you are using those keywords, mirroring their same language. That's your best bet. Now, I will say this is a really tough job market or hiring market right now. So, even doing all the right things, you might still find that you're not getting a ton of response or you're getting rejection emails or those, canned rejection emails. And it is really frustrating. But I want to emphasize that that is not the fault of the job seeker. It's just that we are in a really competitive environment right now, especially if you were trying to get into something like instructional design or user experience. Like those are two fields that a teacher could transition to pretty easily under normal circumstances, but they're also fields where there is a lot of saturation right now. So just kind of keep that in mind. And sorry, one other thing that I'll throw out there, backtracking just a little bit, with the master resume idea, it might also be helpful for you to create multiple versions of your master resume. So what I have done in the past, I obviously have like the teaching, training, and instruction experience, the career development experience, and then I've also done some, community engagement and like volunteer management experience. So I actually have 3 master resumes that are multiple pages long, and then I will, make copies of those, like I said, and tailor them down or whittle them down to that specific job. So that might be something that's also helpful for you. So want to throw that as out as well. But thank you for that question. ATS are really important. So I'm glad we were able to touch on that. Okay, here's another fantastic question. So, on LinkedIn, you see that there are thousands of people for one job. I think that many of us have found that we aren't even getting interviews. Are there really that many candidates for these jobs? How do you stand out among so many people? So, let's address the second part of that question first. We were just talking about, how do you stand out with your resume in terms of the applicant tracking system. So that information, I'm not going to repeat myself there, but that's really helpful. Pay attention to tailoring your resume. The second thing is making sure that you are, really researching that company and putting information into your cover letter that is going to establish that connection, right? So, like, the jobs that I've had in career development, in my cover letters, I talk about how, I'm really passionate about helping people and trying to improve people's career outlook and, doing things that serve others. So, trying to establish that connection. I go beyond that too. And I'll think about, the universities that I've worked at or the companies that I've worked for, like FlexJobs, and I pay attention to like what their mission is and, emphasize that, that really, strikes a tone with me and I care about it. Like, for example, with FlexJobs, During the pandemic, obviously, everybody was shifting to remote work. FlexJobs has been doing this since 2007. So I did a little bit of like bragging about them to them in my cover letter where I was talking about how, I was so impressed that they were, so ahead of the curve. They envisioned this market shift before it ever even happened. So that's another way that you can help yourself stand out with your cover letter, like really kind of personalizing it to that specific organization. One other thing that I'll mention there, and then we'll address the first part of your question, is to look for recruiters on LinkedIn for that company, or reach out to people that are working in HR, or maybe the person who might be supervising this role. See if you can find them on LinkedIn and do a little bit of what I was talking about in the cover letter there. Reaching out, mentioning that you applied for this position, point out one or two things that make you highly qualified for that role, mention something that's really appealing to you about that organization, and then ask, could you tell me the status of the hiring process, or something just to kind of like open up the conversation. So doing that follow up with a recruiter or hiring manager or someone in HR, that can be really helpful as well. Now, in terms of applying for jobs on LinkedIn and seeing, what this person's referring to is, you see when you open a job on LinkedIn, it'll say, 891 applicants so far, or whatever, next to the job title. Don't be afraid when you see that. I follow a ton of recruiters on LinkedIn, and they are constantly posting about how, you should not pay attention to that number. So many of those people are ones that are just, spamming applications out. They're just hitting that like quick apply button. They're not actually qualified. They're not actually tailoring their materials. So that is really kind of skewing that information. So don't let those numbers scare you. Now, again, that being said, we are in a competitive job market, like we talked about with the last question. So it is normal that, you're probably not getting a lot of interviews initially, or the interviews are just kind of trickling in one every week or so, or couple weeks, things like that. The average job search does take about 6 months, which is really hard for teachers because you have the summer really to focus all your attention on your job search. So, if you find during the school year that you're getting some time here and there where you can continue your job search, even though you might be teaching full time, do try to keep that up, because the job search does take a while. I apologize for rambling there, but there was a lot of good questions all boiled into, one question there. But thank you for asking all that. How many keywords should be included? So going back to the idea of ATS, there's some debate about this, and it's tough because, like I mentioned, it's a little bit of a guessing game. There is a website out there called JobScan, and JobScan, what it does is it will analyze a position description that you provide, analyze your resume, and then tell you sort of what percent match you have. Now, it's a pretty good tool to use, knowing that it's also guessing. Like, it doesn't have the employer's insight to know what they actually listed in the ATS as a keyword. It's kind of guessing and then analyzing your resume in comparison to what it's guessing. JobScan says that if you get, like a 50% or so match on their website, then that's pretty solid. I would say, in general terms, like if you're looking at a position description, and I've had roles in the past where I've written resumes for people and I tailor them to specific postings. And what I do, I go through and I'll highlight, like I said, keywords and phrases that stand out. When I go, when I add them to the resume, I'll go back and highlight them in a different color so that I can look at it and think like, okay, am I hitting at least like 50 to 60% of what I guessed were the most important keywords? That's what I usually would recommend. If you can go beyond that, awesome. It's not always possible, but try to hit at least, 50 to 60% of what you've been able to identify as, solid keywords there. So that would be my suggestion. Excuse me one second. Frog in my throat. I apologize. Thank you for asking that question. All right, so the next one here, are summaries in resumes necessary? I've heard several HR managers say they don't read them, but all resume templates have a section for it. Yeah, so you're highlighting a really good, I guess I'll call it an issue here in terms of the job search process, is that different recruiters, different HR managers, different employers altogether, they have their different preferences. Some will read them, some won't. Some will read your cover letters, some won't. I think it is really beneficial for reasons I mentioned previously to include a summary section. It gives you that opportunity to capture their attention quickly. It's a great place to focus the bulk of your tailoring efforts so you don't have to revamp your entire resume. I'm a big fan of summaries. I say include them. Don't include an objective, that's outdated. So you want to avoid that. But I think there's no harm in including a summary section, just like there's no harm in including a cover letter. Even if it's not going to be read, at least you have it there just in case it's needed. So that would be my advice there. Good question, though. Appreciate you asking it. Okay, so our next one here, are extensive years as a volunteer similar to those of teachers? I'm assuming you meant like transitioning into new jobs. Yeah, volunteer work really good. You can leverage that on your resume for sure. If it's something that maybe you did while you were on like a career break, you could have it in your professional experience section. You could also put it in its own section called maybe volunteerism and community engagement. But yes, volunteerism definitely has a place on your resume as long as you're focusing on the things that matter. Emphasize those soft or transferable skills, like your ability to solve problems and work with the team and communicate effectively. Like, keep out the stuff that isn't going to be relevant or isn't going to resonate with that employer or potential employer, and focus on the things that matter. So that would be my suggestion there. But yes, volunteerism is fantastic and definitely has a place on your resume. Good question. Okay, so is a functional resume better for changing careers than a traditional? Fantastic question here. And actually, let me go ahead and share my screen a moment. So in the resources tab, there's that PDF you can download that has all the resources in there. And one of the resources we have is our samples, templates, and scripts where you can find all these resume samples. So for those of you who aren't aware, a functional resume is one where you are the one on the screen here is not a functional resume, right? Like, it has the summary and skills section, like I've mentioned, and then it has the professional experience listed out in reverse chronological order. So this is more of a chronological resume. A functional resume is one where you start with a summary and key skill section, but then you start to list out like your best attributes or your best contributions that you've made, kind of giving like all the highlights of your career. So that can be helpful if you are trying to make this career transition. I recommend maybe doing sort of a hybrid or a combination. So this one, resume sample number 5 that we have here, is where you can see sort of the hybrid. They start with that summary and key skills, then they hit some of their key contributions that they've had throughout their career or their key, accomplishments or achievements, and then they go into that reverse chronological description of their professional experience. So that hybrid option might be your best bet, especially if there are, sort of a random mixture of things that you've done throughout your career that stem from lots of past positions that you've had that you really want to bring to the attention as quickly as possible of that hiring manager. So this might allow you to do this, because this can be kind of like your miscellaneous section. You could put accomplishments or achievements or contributions from volunteer experience, from your own education, from your different jobs. Like, it doesn't have to be specific to one job or one experience like it would in the chronological only style of resume. So kind of a combination of chronological and functional here would probably be your best bet there. Okay. All right. So I'm gonna try to squeeze in one more question. I know we're over time here, but I want to squeeze in one more question. This person is asking, how does one's individual uniqueness keep him or her moving forward in a positive way? When is positive attitude just as important as a very specific job skill? So your positive attitude, the things that make you unique, those are important. But what you need to think about in the job search process is the stuff that you're bringing to the table. So your experience, your skills, your accomplishments, like, those are all the ingredients of a recipe. One ingredient does not a dish make. So it's going to help you stand out. It's going to be a positive check mark in the yes column for you, but you also do need to have some other things that you're bringing to the table. So like I mentioned in the webinar recording, keep that 60% rule in mind. If you have a majority of the qualifications they're looking for, that's going to be good enough to get you into that interview, hopefully. assuming the market's not totally saturated. But then you are able to let that positive energy, that uniqueness, those other kind of personality traits really shine through. But they are, one ingredient to a recipe that has lots of ingredients listed. So, it's not going to be the only thing you can rely on, but it is going to be something that you can leverage in a positive way. So, all right, we are going to draw to a close there. We are quite a bit over time. That is my fault because obviously I am a bit chatty here, but really glad that you all could join us for this webinar today. If you are teachers or former teachers like myself thinking about making this change, my heart goes out to you. I know it's challenging profession. I have a lot of respect for teachers. So hopefully you've got some helpful information here. Hopefully the Q&A was beneficial for you as well. But really appreciate you all taking the time to be here. Encourage you to check out the resources tab there and maybe join us for future webinars as well. So thank you again. Enjoy the rest of your day. Take care.